you've seen a far greater awareness, a far greater rise in Taiwanese identity. And the more that Xi Jinping has thrown his weight around, intimidating, cracking down in Hong Kong, the atrocities in Xinjiang, then people in Taiwan have looked across at China and said, well, actually, we don't want anything to do with this Communist Party. We don't want anything to do with a China led by Xi Jinping. And you've actually seen the two sides of the Taiwan Strait move apart rapidly. You have Xi Jinping building this almost dystopian, repressive surveillance state. And on the other side, in Taiwan, you have the flourishing of what by most measures is one of the world's most successful new democracies, open, diverse, liberal, celebrating their civic culture, celebrating diversity.
The issue of Taiwan has been one that has largely been, I wouldn't say settled, but it seemed we'd learned to live with it. What's changed?
Yeah, it was always there, Alexis, simmering in the background, if you like. And the threats that came from China they were a little bit like the Daleks in Doctor Who, exterminate, exterminate. Every time somebody, whether it was a celebrity, a country, or a company, suggested that Taiwan was a country. I mean, they were always words that they didn't like, but it was there as background noise and people kind of got used to it. But I think what's happened more recently is China under Xi Jinping has become much more belligerent. And the idea of taking Taiwan is quite central to his view of the rejuvenization of the Chinese nation. It's become central to his Chinese dream. And he's become much more aggressive in the way that he's asserted that claim. And of course, the Chinese military is much stronger than it has been in the past. And unlike other crises, it's become this one is being seen as one in which China potentially could follow through. Now, I think that an invasion is a far more difficult thing to achieve than an embargo or the intimidation. But I think the other thing that's happened, which has changed quite radically, is you've seen a far greater awareness, a far greater rise in Taiwanese identity. And the more that Xi Jinping has thrown his weight around, intimidating, cracking down in Hong Kong, the atrocities in Xinjiang, then people in Taiwan have looked across at China and said, well, actually, we don't want anything to do with this Communist Party. We don't want anything to do with a China led by Xi Jinping. And you've actually seen the two sides of the Taiwan Strait move apart rapidly. You have Xi Jinping building this almost dystopian, repressive surveillance state. And on the other side, in Taiwan, you have the flourishing of what by most measures is one of the world's most successful new democracies, open, diverse, liberal, celebrating their civic culture, celebrating diversity, while across the other side of the strait, you've got the Chinese Communist Party cracking down on any hint of diversity or opposition to the party. So for all these reasons, the two sides of the strait are further apart, I think, than they have ever been. And of course, that's before you even get to the question of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's claim over Taiwan, which itself is extremely dubious.
Ian, can we draw any parallels, as some people have done, in what's happening in Ukraine? The idea that has encouraged Xi Jinping to take the actions that he has towards Taiwan, or is that really be a little bit of a false flag, because China has always had their eye on Taiwan?
Yeah, they have, and they've always claimed it as their own sovereign territory, although, in my opinion, I don't think that really stands up to scrutiny historically, culturally. But I think that I was in Taiwan in early May researching the book, and there was a lot of discussion then, a lot of comment about the impact of the Ukraine war, the influence that would have. And I think there's been a lot of suggestion that maybe Xi Jinping has paused, that maybe he's looked at the blunders of Russia in Ukraine. He's looked at the ability of an apparently weaker and less well-equipped military to hold a country like China, a country like Russia at bay, and has drawn his own conclusions. And there was a feeling there that, well, maybe in the short term, this makes Taiwan a safer place. But others have said, well, no, maybe Xi is reaching other conclusions and wants to accelerate his efforts to get Taiwan before Taiwan starts to learn the lessons of Ukraine, because already there's a lot of discussion in Taiwan about changing their defensive stance to go more for this sort of hybrid warfare, for smaller, mobile, more lethal type of weaponry, not to try and take China on in the big systems, but to do it in a way that would make any sort of invasion extremely costly and possibly make the PLA think twice before launching one. So there is a debate, has Ukraine made Taiwan a safer place in the short term? I suspect it probably has. And I would see these military exercises, unprecedented in scale though they are, as sort of some big militarized tantrum, really. And I suspect that they were probably in the making for some time, given the complexity, and that Pelosi's visit was just the excuse they needed to launch them.
Ian, just briefly, we've all but run out of time, but because a lot of people may be thinking, well, Taiwan's very far away. It's a very small island, and they're going to be trying to sort of interpret the significance of this. But one thing we need to say is that Taiwan is responsible for 53% of the market share of those semiconductor chips, which is the reasoning, for example, that the car production is ground to a halt, and basically anything that you use that is powered up has a semiconductor chip. So Taiwan is really important to everywhere, to all over the world.
It does. And in fact, that figure rises to 90% in the top end of chip production, the fastest, the smallest. Taiwan is a linchpin in the global high-tech economy. It's incredibly important, and arguably the impact of a conflict around there would be more damaging for the world economy than what we've seen in Ukraine. And also, of course, don't forget that this wouldn't be just a territorial grab. It would be the crushing of a very successful, lively, open, liberal democracy, which is why that would be very difficult for, I think, like-minded countries to accept, but particularly the United States.
Okay.